that you're a loser, that you failed, that the world would be better without you. That's not God. That's not how God talks to us. Welcome to The Middle. I'm Ganel-Lyn, your host. I'm grateful for this chance to share some thoughts with you on a topic that we had a viewer message and reach out to me specifically and ask that we would talk about this subject, and that's of anxiety and depression. We have had a wonderful guest that came on the Yellow Couch, Heather Johnson. If you haven't caught her episode, I'd invite you to go back and listen to that. But at the time of this taping, it's September, and that's Suicide Prevention Month. And even though I've shared a little bit about my sister Meg and her death by suicide over 6 years ago, I felt like this was a great opportunity to share some thoughts on anxiety and depression, specifically maybe how I've approached it in my own life and my own mental health. But I've noticed that there's certain topics that we could talk about it every day and we would still need to keep talking about it. And I really believe anxiety, depression, and suicide is exactly the topic that we need to constantly keep in the forefront of our minds and in our families because it's complicated. And so as I was wrestling with what to share with you, I felt like one of the things that I've experienced with anxiety and depression is that I'm aware of it. I do work around it. I've read a ton of research. I've written books. I've given talks. I go on TV and talk about it. I share on video shows about these ideas and how we can navigate around them. But I still find myself struggling. Like just a couple of days ago, I felt the darkness really kind of encroaching in every area of my life. And the story in my head and the wrestle I was having was pretty intense. And I have skills. And on those days, I try to go and pull those skills out and use them because I don't feel like doing it. But I know logically, okay, when I find myself feeling this way, this is what I need to do. And so I thought it might be helpful to share what I find has helped me. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same for everyone. I definitely would say that on the spectrum of anxiety and depression, I am not a chronic depressed person. There is probably more anxiety in my life than there is depression, but I'm aware of both parts of my spirit and my heart and what I wrestle with. So maybe you are finding this episode and you're like your whole life has been dealing with this. Like my sister Meg, she got really tired. It was 40 years of therapy and medicine and trying different tools that would help her navigate her wrestle. And so if you're finding this episode and that's your story, I just want you to know first and foremost, I totally get that you're tired. I know that you're feeling at times maybe that it's never going to get better. It's always going to be this way. And so how are you supposed to fight one more day? Maybe you're finding this episode and like me, it's more periodic that you deal with depression and that you're able to identify it. I loved when Heather was on The Middle and she shared that she kind of can see what depression looks like and she can see it coming and she can push it aside a little bit easier than her anxiety. And I think for me, that's similar. But regardless of how much anxiety or depression you deal with, I think we all are dealing with a lot of vulnerability. And it's helpful to kind of frame actionable steps to take when maybe your heart and your head aren't syncing up and you don't know what to do and you're tired and you're worn out and you're frustrated. So the first thing I wanted to share is that when I feel the dark is too much, I literally reframe that and I say, what do I need to do to turn up the light? And so that's my first tip. For me, when the dark is really intense, the way it honestly plays out is I start to feel really self-critical and everything that I'm doing isn't working. And I'm not a good enough mom or a good enough wife. I'm not being effective in my work. And that's usually a big sign for me that I need to be aware of some depression creeping in or some anxiety. What happens if I ignore that too much and I don't do some self-care and intervention is that can start to make me want to step away from the things that are meaningful to me. And that includes relationships. So one of the first things I would invite you to consider is, when the dark gets intense, what does that look like for you? Do you avoid phone calls? Do you not show up for appointments? Do you feel like you're failing and so you're overly critical at everything you're doing? Maybe you avoid and you don't maybe show up for deadlines at work or at school. Maybe your self-care goes away and you want to sleep more. Whatever it is, I think it's helpful to just see, hey, when the dark gets intense, this is what it looks like for me. And then you can flip that around. For me, one of the things I love to do for turning up the light, and we were just talking about this before we started taping, is music. Specifically, I love Christmas music. When I'm in a really dark place, my family knows it doesn't matter if it's June or July, they may come home and find Christmas music blasting in the house because it changes the light in my life. I love therapy, and I'm not currently seeing a therapist, but I have in the past. And oftentimes people will say to me, yeah, but I haven't had a good experience with therapy. I like to say, well, have you ever had a bad haircut? It's not like you say, I'm never getting my haircut again just because you had a really bad experience with one hair stylist. You find another one that works better for you. So if therapy hasn't worked in the past, I invite you to consider asking some friends. Doing a little quick search of, even posting on social media, who has a good therapist that they would recommend. And I know that can feel really vulnerable, but I love therapy. Friends for me are a super important part of turning up the light. They are probably my first step. If Christmas music isn't working, I will often say, who is a friend that I can reach out to today? And my list is a pretty good list of trusted 5. And that's because oftentimes the first few on the list aren't available. And I'll call them and I'll reach out, I'll text, I'll Marco Polo our message, and I'll just say, hey, I'm struggling. The dark has gotten too much. That's how I frame it. And they know what that means. And they can help me because that voice in my head of how I'm failing, they're the counter voice to that. And they can get rid of the distortion in my head. One of my other favorite things is massage. I know that might sound crazy, but I get regular massages. I've shared on the middle my journey with chronic illness, and with lupus, I have joint pain, but I have found it a helpful mental health tool. When the dark gets too intense, the dark starts to feel like I'm carrying it around in my body. And massage has been a really helpful tool for turning up the light. Meditation is really great. There's some amazing apps to help if meditation overwhelms you. It's quieting the chatter in my head. That sometimes it's the chatter that makes the dark overwhelming. Scripture and prayer here on Saints, on this channel, we talk about faith really openly, and it's a really important tool in my life. But if you're dealing with chronic depression and anxiety, sometimes prayer and scripture study, it's just not going to cut it. You can't distinguish oftentimes the voice of criticism and of your own self from the voice of God in your life. And so that's why I think tools like therapy and good friends help distinguish the voice. If the voice in your head is that you're horrible, that you're a loser, that you failed, that the world would be better without you, that's not God. That's not how God talks to us. And so as much as scripture and prayer is helpful for the light, it may not be helpful today. You may have to find other things on your list. Maybe these things don't resonate with you, but I do know that compiling a list and then constantly adding to it is helpful. We had a wonderful guest on the Mahis. They talked about the grief of their daughter. And one of the things I learned from Sunny is that she has some really actionable steps she takes that are healthy to intervene when she's not doing well. And I love she brought up playing music, and she plays piano and journaling. And I think those are really great tools to put on your turning up the light list. The next thing I want to talk about is turning up the love. And I mentioned this a little bit with friends. Oftentimes we isolate when we're struggling with anxiety and depression because we feel like we're a burden, or we're going to make someone else's life hard or their day bad if we share with them how we're struggling. But I've come to know that my trusted friends, it's reciprocal. Like when they're struggling, they know they can reach out to me, and we trust each other. Even on my worst days, one of the most helpful things is a friend to call me and say they're struggling. So service is a way in which I turn up the love in my life. Oftentimes when we isolate, then the only voice we're hearing is our own voice, and it makes the dark worse. So I invite you to consider turning up the love in your life. There's a show right now that I just started watching, and it's one of these endurance race shows. And my producer invited me to start watching it, and I love it. In the very first episode, there's a member of one of the teams that is struggling and gets really dehydrated. And the rules of this race is that the whole team has to stay in the race or else you're disqualified. So you can't have one member of the team, quit and the team still keep going, that they all have to stay together. And I think that's such a great analogy for dealing with depression and anxiety. And oftentimes in our families, we have to have really careful boundaries if someone in our family is dealing with chronic mental health issues, because it is hard for the whole team, so to speak. But the very first episode of this show, that is the image has stayed in my mind, is that this one team member got over dehydrated and their team kept stopping and trying to help him. And they were giving food and water and letting him rest. But at one point they tie a rope around his waist and they just start walking to stay, because it's a timed race, right? It's a race. There's a time clock going. And so instead of stopping completely to help him keep walking, is they tie this rope, and it's not like the rope is really helping him walk. It almost looks like it's so loose that I'm like, is it even helping? But the visual of that was so impactful for me, because I think so often I've been that person. I've been that dehydrated, exhausted. I can't regulate my emotional temperature and I want to quit. And I have told my faith friends, my trusted friends, the people closest to me, my tribe, don't let me convince you to leave me on the side of the road. Like, you have full permission to kick me in the tail and make me get up and walk. And on this show, I loved watching as they kept him walking just by the fact that there was a rope around his waist and they weren't going to let go of it. We all need to feel at times that there's just a symbolic rope around our waist and we're not going to be left alone. But oftentimes on a team, we switch places, and sometimes we're the one that is struggling, that's overly exhausted, that's maybe not able to keep pushing through. And we're now not the helper. We're the one needing the help. Maybe you feel like you've always been the one on the other side of the rope, where you're the one being dragged all the time and that now you're a burden. I've shared before publicly that I know that that's what my sister believed, that somehow we were going to be better without her. And that she was tired of being the one that has the rope around her waist, that we were trying to always pull her along. The reality was that wasn't the truth. There was oftentimes she was the one helping me, and that my life isn't better because she's not here, even though I know that for her, that chronic struggle with depression and anxiety became too much, and she felt like the only way out was to take her life. And so I hope if you're listening to this, that you will know that at times you have been the one that has helped carry the rope. And maybe you don't realize it. Maybe today the best way in which you're going to turn up the love in your life is you're going to stay off social media. Because I know for me, even just this week, I do a lot of my work there. That's where I connect, I share content, I message around hope and faith and suicide prevention. But if I'm not careful, I hang out on social media too much. And that doesn't help the voice in my head stay clear and light. It becomes chatter about comparisons, about this other person and how successful they're being. Or it's just a distraction that isn't allowing me to do some of the things on that first list I gave you about turning up the light. I'm not praying. I'm not reading my scriptures. I'm not meditating. I'm not connecting with people in real life. I'm just scrolling and liking. And that isn't great always for that feeling of love that I need to have, that you need to have, to feel like it counterbalances the intensity that is playing out in the world right now. Finally, turning up the light, turning up the love, I would say we need to sometimes turn up the clock. That's a play on words because I like to have alliteration and I like to have symbolism. It helps me remember complex issues. But what I mean about turning up the clock is sometimes we think that whatever we're dealing with today is how our life is always going to be, and it's not. It can feel that way though, especially for those of you that have spent a lifetime dealing with maybe addiction, learning disabilities, chronic illness, or depression and anxiety. I know for you, you're thinking this is how it always is going to feel. It's always going to be this way. But I promise you, your miracle is coming. Sometimes I just need to tell myself that day, it won't always be this way. Even though at times my fear is, it will always be this way. How am I going to possibly do this forever? So one of the things that in 12-step that I love, that I learned from for a time while I was in 12-step, is that I can do today, one day, what if I had to do for my life would make me go insane. And so for just today, they have a whole list of just for todays that you can Google and search and print out. And they're really helpful whether you deal with addiction or not. Just for today, I'm going to do this. But if I did it for my whole life, it would cause me to lose my mind. So just for today, you're going to turn up the light. You're going to reach out for connection and turn up the love. Make sure that you realize that your story isn't done. That whatever you feel is happening, especially in high school, I know that there were times in high school that I thought that whatever is happening in high school is my forever. And it's so not. I've been out of high school a long time, and I can see that there's so many different stories that played out than what I thought. Some of them are better. The miracles I had no idea they were coming came. And so I hope that if you're finding this episode that you'll know that your time isn't done. That if you're tired, I get that. I get that it's okay to do a pause, to do some self-care, to get some additional support, to ask for some help, that your team member is maybe willing to share with you because they don't feel dehydrated emotionally or spiritually or mentally right now, and that they're willing to hold on to that other side of the rope to let you know that you're not alone, but that we need you on the team. We need you to be here. We need you for the days that we don't know how to get out of the pit, that you've been there before. So I hope that something that I've shared will help in your own wrestle with anxiety and depression. Maybe you don't deal with that, but someone close to you does. Please share this episode with them and let them know that we need them, especially in the month of September, where we're talking about suicide prevention. All of us, though, whether it's September, whether we deal with depression and anxiety or not, have dark days where the light needs to be turned up, where we're isolating, so we need to turn up the love, where we're frustrated that our life is never going to change and we need to turn up the clock. We need to realize that whatever we're battling, that there is a new story still coming, and that the end of the story hasn't been written. And so I hope you'll keep visiting with us here at The Middle, that you'll keep fighting to stay because we need you. And thank you again for joining us here on The Middle.